on this computer. Is that all right with it? Okay. Well, this book, which is Dante's Florence, it's the second chapter in my Dante book for Palgrave Macmillan, but I'm allowed to publish material in Italian, so this will be published in Italian. And I'm really pleased with it because we discovered so many aspects of Florence connected with Dante, including the real Dante house and the column in the Piazza Santa Felicita, which Villani describes 1,000 young Florentines all dressed in white coming to celebrate the god of love. When Dante's 18, in which he says he sees Beatrice in white when he's 18, and also Francesca de Barberino illustrates that column. And it is the same column with the Corinthian top. And also the importance of the burials of the Compagnia de Laudesi of San Michele beside Santa Reparata, where I found a document in the Santa Maria del Fiore archives listing Dante's neighbors and fellow companions of the Compagnia de Laudesi, some of whom were his enemies, like Filippo Argenti, but some of them his great friends, like Guido Cavalcanti and Brunetto Latino, get listed in this document, which is a necrologia, which is about the contemporary, it's written at the same time that these people die to record the need to remember them. So that's one project, and I'm going backwards. Then I wrote an essay on the ways in which Dante is taught by Brunetto the love of God, of neighbor, of enemy, and realizing that this is the formula that we need to undo racism and war. If only we could have this concept right now between Palestine and Israel. And I can remember giving blessed olive leaves in Nairobi when the bomb happened there, and then that same week also in Ireland, in Omagh, and flying to Ireland with a sack of blessed olive leaves, so that Protestants and Catholics could give them to each other in a reconciliation, which I think is more valuable than money. But in this essay, I was speaking about the need to undo hierarchies. Hierarchy was a word that was invented by Pseudo Dionysius, who pretended he was a contemporary of Christ and Paul on the Areopagus and so forth, when he actually was a Syrian who lived several centuries later. And it was very convenient to the Byzantine emperors to shape the Orthodox Christianity in the form of hierarchies of angels, of ecclesiastical persons, and so on. But it's absolutely the opposite of what we see in the gospel, where Jesus is open to the enemy, like the Samaritan, open to those who are the other, the leper, the woman, and so on and so forth. And what was fascinating was I posted it on Academia Edu, and they put it through an AI, artificial intelligence thing, and came up to be examining all the pros and the cons. And there were only pros, and there were so many essays, all of which were saying the solution is to undo hierarchies. So that was an enormous relief. These were essays written by Catholics and Protestants, and also Muslims and so on and so forth, where they were all seeing that this desire for being superior to the other creates the master-slave situation, the violation of the settlers, and so on. And I was really relieved that had sort of hit on this. And I shared that essay with some of you. And if any of you want to have a copy, if they don't yet have it, let me know. And then after that, before that, because I'm going backwards, we had the presentation, but not of our plaque that we had made, because they objected to it being made by Aroma. But they did allow me to give a speech, but only about 9 minutes. And it was rather an interesting situation, because before I prepared a talk with slides, but they said, no, 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 it can't be that long, it has to be short. But this is the one I prepared with the slides. Let me see if I can advance the, it's always there. This, I've already shared this with you, but Mona Tessa, she's the one who is Dante Beatrice's nurse, who founds the Order of the Oblati, which still exists. And I was seeing them when I was in Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. In fact, one
Across
of them,
the road, yes.
nurses, right? So the research was becoming very full-blooded in a way. But she was Beatrice's nurse, and then founded this nursing order to care for the sick pilgrims who came to Florence. And these are the Oblati today, many of them third world, but they are the descendants of Mona Tessa's order. And here we see more of them. And I was seeing the hospital as connected with Dante. Remember, he doesn't become a member of the Notai, Giudici e Notai, but a member of the Medici Speciali. So he would have studied medicine. And where would he have studied it? Well, in Beatrice's father's Portinari Hospital. And this is the hospital in a very lovely manuscript, Rustici Codex, showing it as it was in the Middle Ages. And again, this is a fresco of it. And again, a reconstruction of what it was like. This is the corridor you see with the arches, where Mona Tessa's effigy is, and now also Sarapaka Raymond's plaque. And then this is what it was like in the Renaissance, and as it is today with the COVID tent, with the Renaissance facade added to it. But the main building behind it is the medieval one. And so I was talking about the aspect of the art in it, which was seen as healing. Here you see patients and various people curing the sick. And also this very lovely painting, which was commissioned by Tommaso Portinari, descendant of Folco Portinari, in Bruges of Ugo van der Goes, where the Christ child is ourselves. The mother has given birth to the child in the filth of the stable, and the child is very frail, needing the care of everyone. It's a splendid painting. And then the study of anatomy, these are crucifixes in Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. The celebration, in a way, of the human body and the knowledge of the human body is crucial to Florentine art. And here you see Christ coming from the tomb, sleeping soldiers. So the art, sorry about the ambulance going to Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. And then this is my drawing of Michelangelo's self-portrait as a Misericordia worker. This was in the Duomo when I was 21 with my first baby in my arms, sketching this, while the priest was preaching against La Dolce Vita. And Leonardo da Vinci did his research, and these are his drawings of the fetus. And Nicholas Denoni, we were awarded the prize of Nicholas Denoni. He came from Copenhagen and became Catholic. He was the first real geologist and also a medical doctor. And then the hospital very much centered on obstetrics. And these tools we have for the forceps and so on, and the baby in the womb and so on. But the problem was the doctors were not washing their hands. They knew all of the surgical procedures for childbirth, but the women following childbirth were dying like flies of puerperal fever until in the 1860s they began to realize that there was a need for washing cleanliness, because the women who were poorer and looked after by women survived, but the women who were rich and from important families looked after by men did not. And my cemetery is filled with graves of those women. This is the crutch, which is the emblem of Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. And we find these pieces of the little cup thrown away in a cemetery from Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. And this is what it was like, and this is what it is like today, and so forth. And so I was wanted to talk about the cemetery and slavery. Elizabeth Barrett Browning from Jamaica, slave-owning family, part black herself, and Frances Trollope, who travels up the Mississippi and sees slavery firsthand and writes about it in Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, which we published. Theodore Parker, who preaches against slavery, and his tomb is commissioned by Frederick Douglass. And Richard Hildreth, who's his friend, who writes the White Slave, and this is his scene of the last daughter being snatched. This is very much what happened to our Roma family who lost their 4 children. And then we have the black slave buried with us, Nadezhda de Santos. She was brought to Florence at 14 in the expedition of Giampaolo Rossellini, paid for by the Grand Duke. And this painting, very romantic with all of the loot, is in the Museo Archeologico. And here's Frederick Douglass. And Daniel did the plaque for Frederick Douglass's visit here. And these are the entries in Frederick Douglass's diary about coming here and doing seeing the tombs, and also the one of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And then Duke Alexander de Medici is the son of a black slave. Hiram Powers is sculpted, the Greek slave. We also have the daughter of a Greek slave who was purchased by a Scottish archaeologist in the market in Alexandria, and who marries her and so forth. And he's part Native American, and he just does this beautiful sculpture of the last of their tribe. And also America trampling on slave chains. This was rejected by Congress before the Civil War because they wanted to continue owning slaves. And his sculpture was seen by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who wrote this very fine sonnet to it, and which we have translated. And women sculptors, and then Rome, the Roma and the slavery. Lorenzo Bartolini's monument for Prince Demidov, who practiced a great deal of charity in Florence. One of his friends was the noble Johann Cantacuzene, descended from the Emperor of Constantinople, who possessed Roman slaves, and his tomb is in our cemetery. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning's tomb, where Leighton has a broken slave shackle because of her writings against slavery. And this is a slave poster in Romania selling slaves. And these are Daniel and Bandana making their cradle for their baby in our project. And then we have this very fine young English woman come, one of the 2 twins, to teach the Roma how to do letter carving on marble. And here they are teaching Mihai and Daniel, and Marianne, who is Nikolai Aubre's daughter. And she's now married with children. But she's writing out the name of Catherine MacKinnon, who became the governess of the Tsar of Russia from the island of Mull, where she had been very poor. And we talk about the rights of women and children. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, she was practicing inoculation against smallpox, which she learned from the Roma in Constantinople. And this is her own child she has inoculated so that he won't die or be terribly disfigured by this really awful disease. And then who invented the computer? Mary Somerville and Ada Lovelace. And then the Giovan Pietro Bisio, and then medicine and the English cemetery. Thomas Southwood Smith is very concerned about children and gets Elizabeth Barrett Browning to write Cry of the Children, and Francis Trollope, Michael Armstrong, Factory Boy. And he's also concerned about decent housing for the poor. These are all of our doctors, some of them with a nice bedside manner, like Kresanowski, and others who were really caring and so on. And their stories are fascinating. Dr. Bartolomeo Odicini was Anita Garibaldi's doctor in Uruguay, and he's buried with us. And I love the picture of his family. That's a photograph taken in Uruguay. And then Sir David Dumbreck, whose tomb is next to his, was the head of the hospitals in the Crimea. And then these are the women who died in childbirth. Fanny Holman Hunt, William Holman Hunt's wife, Louise Kunis-Leconte, that's her self-portrait, and it's stunning, and Sarah McAlmont, and many others. And the diseases that we have: diphtheria, malaria, cholera, tetanus, cancer, anthrax, yes. And I had to bury somebody who had died of anthrax, suicide, and so on. And then these are the figures in medicine: Edward Jenner, Ignaz Semmelweis, Louis Pasteur, and Domenico Chiara, and Joseph Lister were all concerned about disease control through cleanliness, and were able to eventually to create a revolution in medicine. And then women were not allowed to be doctors, so they ended up running hospitals. The Princess Belgiojoso, Margaret Fuller, Jessie White Mario, Florence Nightingale. Octavia Hill, instead, she was concerned about housing. And then James Barry pretended he was a man. And they discovered she gave strict orders that she was not to be undressed and washed when she died. The charwoman didn't get the order, and she went in and did so, and came rushing out saying, "She's a woman and she's had a child," and so forth from the Stria. And this story is a very sad one. I knew the descendant, who was Lorenzo Capet. The original Lorenzo Capet had married into the family that was connected with the Listers, and his wife died in childbirth from twins. And then these Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter Mary Shelley, who was painted twice by my ancestor Richard Rothwell. And I found the entry for Sarah Parker Raymond in the English Protestant cemetery, in the Protestant cemetery in Rome, because it was on the same page. And I was able to tell Marilyn Richardson this. And Sarah Parker Raymond came to Santa Maria Nuova Hospital to study medicine with a letter from Giuseppe Mazzini. And okay, Terence Ward, good. Welcome, Terence. I'm talking about Santa Maria Nuova Hospital, where you came to visit me in August. And I woke up and there you were staring at me. Thank you very much for that. And Sarah Parker Raymond was friends with Giuseppe Garibaldi and Giuseppe Mazzini, and Marilyn Richardson, when I found her burial in Rome, not in Florence, then paid for this plaque to be put up because the tomb was lost. And we wanted to do one for Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. And I wrote this, and then these are the documents about her studying medicine and surgery. And she graduated and so forth. And they decided to put not our plaque because it was made by Roma, but to go and get a machine made one. And they put it up opposite the effigy of Monna Tessa. And these are the oblati that Monna Tessa founded. And this is where you get the very fine discussions of the medicine for men with male doctors, medicine for women with female persons, and so forth. And this is where the maternità was, where we hope to put our plaque if we can get permission. This was where the poorer mothers, the illegitimate mothers, and so forth, gave birth and were tended by women, and probably survived better than did those women who people our cemetery, who were attended by male doctors who were not washing their hands. This is right by the Innocenti, and there you see it, and that's the building where I hope we can put our plaque. And it's just down this street here, going towards the university. And this is the plaque that Daniel made, which was rejected. And this is how he had done it. And these are the other plaques. One is at the University of London and the other at the University of Chester. The University of London is calling its Institute for Advanced Study Sarah Parker Raymond because she studied literature, classics, and medicine in London before she came to Florence. And then this one by the University of Chester is also, they've named their faculty. But this is a ceremony. And I gave this 9-minute talk, no longer allowed to give this lecture. And I got interrupted 3 times because he did not want me to talk about the Roma. And then we have the unveiling of the plaque, which is made by a machine. And I don't like it because when you make things by machine, they're too perfect and they're dead. And if you make things by hand, the slight imperfections mean that they are real, that they are alive. And so that was that talk. And also Alex had given me this wonderful book, God's Hotel, about a hospital in Oakland which treated the poor and really functioned the way Santa Maria Nuova did. And this very fine book on Santa Maria Nuova's history. So at the end where I began, Alcmaeon saying, he was Aristotle's physician, that man dies because he doesn't know how to join the end to the beginning, which is what we do with our project with the Roma in this cemetery, from graves to cradles, where we've made so many cradles for their babies and so forth. And so that's the end of that talk. And I can stop the share and we can all see each other, I hope. Right. Good. Right. Terence, can we see you?
Yes.
Good.
Here we are.
Right. You can all unmute. And then what I would like to also say from our conference we did on Florence in India with the Prince's monument in the Cascine, that went very well indeed. And we were doing it in Delhi with Zoom as well as in Florence. And then the Maharaja, the descendant of the prince, came, and we had the most wonderful day together. And he was telling me he has my father's books in his library in his palace, and he invited me to come. And I haven't yet had the courage to write to him and say, my traveling days are over, and so I won't be coming. but I'm just very touched that my dream of getting to India almost could have happened. So, Terence, how are you?
I'm quite well, thank you.
Yes, yes,
It's
yes.
lovely to see you sparking as usual.
I hope so. Right. Um, yes, I have 2 sessions tomorrow and the next day of the chemotherapy. So that's the fifth cycle. So I'm just, but it is reducing everything. So that's great.
Good,
Mhm.
lovely
So,
news.
yes.
Good news.
So that's a progress report. I was talking also about Terence. This is I'm going to turn the light out so you can see it. This is the book we've just done on
Yes,
Dante's Florence, and this is the cover back and front, and
lovely.
inside the map with all of the numbers of the places in sequence that you can visit,
Oh,
and
lovely.
about the column in Santa Felicita, the piazza, and the importance of O San Michele, and the burials of so many of the people besides Santa Reparata
Mm,
from the necrology earth and so on.
mm.
So I think that will be, and we want to get this published now. So, uh, and it's also, that's going to be in Italian, but it's also the second chapter in the Dante book for Falgrave Macmillan. Okay, now it's open and free for everyone to make comments and so on
Well,
and so forth.
I have a question, Julia.
Yes,
I saw on one of those plaques, Holloway University or something
that's
like that.
right. It is University of London and there's Royal Holloway College or University. I get very confused about them because it was also Queen Mary and they almost hired me, but that's now gone, has joined up with, all of this sort of joining up of things.
But is
Um,
the Holloway anything to do with your family?
no,
Okay.
Holloway, I loved it once. A 100-year-old medical doctor at Quaker meeting rushed up to me and said, "Is Holloway thy name or thy married name?" And I replied, "It is my married name," and they were Quaker slave owners. So that's quite a story in itself. No, I use my maiden name as well as my married name because I don't want to give up the name that my children have. But women don't have their own names.
Well, I thought you were going to talk more about your essay.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, I think it's very good. It's like a condensed version of everything I've ever heard you talk about. Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. And
And I wrote it
tell
in
me,
one morning. Yes.
yeah. So what got you started with it?
When does
How did you start writing this?
just a few days ago, I was thinking about this principle that shows up in Brunetta's teaching of the love of God and neighbor and of enemy to bring about peace in the city. Because he's writing at a time when the Guelphs and the Ghibellines are feuding and exiling each other, when the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs are feuding, and he is trying to resolve that with the peace of Cardinal Latino and so forth. And this is the basic principle of the gospel of Christianity, that you love your enemy. But we don't talk about this very much, do we? We reject the other, we cause the poverty of the other, the genocide of the other, the war against the other, which we're seeing right now between Israel and Palestine. And if only we could go back to this concept of which I can remember Antonia said to me, and we can't track it down, that Rumi said, "There is no other." Did you ever find it, Antonia?
No, I think
I've
it
been
was
looking for it, but
I think it was in one of my Florentine books, which must still be there, because it's not in any book I've got here. But I will eventually track it down.
right, because it's the othering that causes the seeming justification for slavery, for war, and so forth. And if we could recognize, do you remember Pogo saying, we have met the enemy and it is us?
Yeah.
That we need this concept of our common humanity, which we're losing with the hostile environment in Britain. We're losing it with the terrible drownings in the Mediterranean, the refusal to accept the other into, cross-national frontiers and so on.
You know, we watched a little short movie in my Italian class last week called Mare Nostro.
Yes,
They call it a corto
right.
Have you ever seen that?
No, but the phrase Mare Nostrum is so important. It's
So it's
RC. And what I put into the Dante book, I use the Arabic maps, which are upside down to ours. But also there's a French woman who's done this most beautiful map of the Mediterranean this way instead of this way. And you see how it dovetails to each other. You see how close those shores are, the African to the European, which you don't when we look at it horizontally. But vertically, it's absolutely clear.
Well, in the movie, there's a character who's a fisherman. There's a
Yeah.
fisherman who's the main character, and he goes out fishing in his inflatable boat with a young man who's not very responsible, who falls asleep while the other man is scuba diving to spear the fish. So when the young man wakes up, he speeds off to find the Coast Guard because he's lost his bearings. And the man who was scuba diving comes up and finds a man who's the last survivor of one of those refugee ships that has sunk.
Right. Yes.
And he swims with him to a small island with a lighthouse on it. And then when the Coast Guard come, the man hides himself because he doesn't want to be picked up and deported. So the other man promises him he'll come back with his own boat and bring him somewhere safely. But it ends like that. You don't know if he's going to keep his promise or not.
Right.
But it's very powerful, very short and very powerful.
I think Joinville in the Middle Ages writes about there was a hermit on the island of Lampedusa. It's a similar story where the ships barely make contact. Oh, yes. Angela, do you have comments about this? Because it does fit in with your work on international law, I think.
Yeah, my big question that I've been thinking a lot, because I'm of course following within the United States, following the polarization of Democrats and Republicans, progressives and very
and
far
they're both
right
othering,
conservative.
aren't they? Yes.
Oh goodness, that and I'm wondering trying to understand if there really is a problem with focusing on identity. I know that we've come very far in helping people to understand one another's identity. And because I know I struggled with that, way back in the 1960s and 70s, being Italian American actually was a thing. Right now, that's not as pronounced, but people saying nasty things, or is your family in the mafia? Those kinds of and they were sort of joking, but
it's not right.
Not really. So I think overall, I have felt that it's a good thing for people to kind of embrace their heritage, their language, all of that. On the other hand, I'm wondering if that what that does in the process of othering, and I
Mhm.
can't seem to fit it into the polarized framework, but maybe that's not the right
Yes.
framework anyway. So maybe we kind of
Well,
break out of that.
I think there are two things going on there. One is that the right hemisphere accepts the other, includes the other. The left hemisphere is rigid and afraid of the other. It's the one that is hierarchical and clicking boxes and so forth, ticking boxes. But also, one of the things I've realized with the hatred between the Gage and the Roma, the Gage, the non-gypsies, have treated the Roma very, very badly for centuries, practiced genocide and so forth. But the problem is that the Roma, to defend themselves, believe that they are superior to the Gage. And the Gage believe they are superior to the Roma. This is where you've got a hierarchy going on, and you've got clashing hierarchies and so forth. And this is a very dangerous situation. Protestants and Catholics in Ireland, Jews and Arabs in Terra Santa, and so forth. What goes wrong? Everyone has a right to their culture and their identity and their language and their history. What they don't have the right to is to believe that they're superior to the other. Justice is where everyone is equal. And I can't bear it in Italian law courts, the tribunal. There's a statement, the law is equal to everyone. And it's so untrue. I mean, I go to defend Roma, and I see the discrimination is so strong. But if we could actually see justice as being this sense of everyone has the right to exist, and no one has the right to take that from them, the common humanity plus the individual identity, I think both are good. What isn't good is to believe that you are better than the other, that we do need the practice of humility and so forth. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
There's
I mean,
also over here right now, there's an element that of the misinformation that's being spread that induces fear, and the fear is the thing that leads to the violence.
Yeah.
Here, it's really in the news every day, violence related to prejudice and fear, and people having way too many guns, of course. But it's the fear. It's not just the other being different. It's the being afraid of the other doing something to you or taking something from you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's being fed right now. It's
Right,
very
right. Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
very
I
hard.
think
It's very hard to counteract it.
I think it's largely because the other is framed in religious terms of truly demonization. I mean,
Right.
that
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
that you know, that there are demonic forces.
Mm-hmm.
I have a colleague who writes, he's an evangelical Christian, and he writes about the history of Protestantism within the United States, and many coming from the fundamentalist movement, and even earlier, sort of an openness to conspiracy theory because of suspicion of science, and so that cluster of issues. And he really thinks that a lot of the, I mean, I know it happens on the progressive side as well, but certainly he's looking at the more conservative traditionalist groups, and the language of, liberals are not just wrong-headed or, choosing the wrong policies, or, I mean, they're really demons. They're evil, they're satanic, they're, so that kind of language is about as far as you can go in othering
Right. Mhm.
entire populations, and then you've moved beyond identity politics, or identity, cultural identity. You've moved way beyond someone's, someone is African American or so. Now we're just in, you associate yourself with a particular party, and that's enough to create this massive split. And Laura's right. It's just it's a dangerous time. And just a shooting almost every day. There are these,
Yeah.
I'm losing count.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
in my-
remember America before civil rights, traveling through Texas with the signs on the drinking fountains, whites only, and so forth. And I can remember how people talked about blacks, which really disturbed me, that they are subnormal, less intelligent, violent, criminal, and so on and so forth. The same kind of discussion I hear today about the Roma, where they're driven into poverty, and their only mode of survival is to beg and to steal. And where we've created an alternate to that that's been very successful. They've restored the cemetery. 50 of them now know how to read and write, when before they
many?
didn't even know how to write their names. And I'm really so proud of them, because their skills are marvelous, and they're such kind, decent people. But that's not seen by the normal Florentine who sees the beggar in the street and so on. And it's really, I mean, that's why we were not allowed to put our plaque up in Santa Maria Nuova. It also disturbed me when Santa Maria Nuova Hospital was founded by Folco Portinari and Mona Tessa to treat those who were poor, everyone. But when I was going there to emergency and then put in a ward, I was watching. They were saying, you don't have the tessera sanitaria, the right to medical care, so you have to go out. You can't be treated. To people who come across the Mediterranean and had survived instead of drowned, they then were denied medical treatment at Santa Maria Nuova Hospital, because it can only treat people who have the right to medical care with the card, which I do have. And I really felt very uneasy about that. At least couldn't they have told them where there might be an alternate place where they could receive medical care, like the Nicholas Denoni clinic and so on? Because medicine should be not a privilege but a right, human right.
Mm.
Education should be not a privilege but a human right. And in America, education and medicine are privileges if you have the money, for the insurance. And I'm very grateful to Italy for the medical care I receive. At the same time, I feel guilt about it, and so forth. Terence, could you add some comment?
About Italy, well, perhaps I'd begin by saying that,
Can you adjust your screen so we can
oh,
see you?
sorry, here I
Right,
am.
good. Yes, thank
Perhaps
you.
I'd begin by saying, it's the 100th anniversary, actually last year, of the March on Rome. And it also was the year that Meloni was elected. And the drama that I think all our cultures are going to face is simply the question of identity. everybody defines it in their own way. I think all of us here would agree that we have no problem with having a multicultural identity, because in that you somehow embrace the larger world, which as a humble human being, it's really hard to deny you're part of this so-called human family. But with all the fears that the ladies were speaking of, that are ginned up to really create a climate of insecurity, climate of fear, a climate of not being safe, that really is the heart of, I think, being a conservative, of rounding the fortress. I don't know if I mentioned to you this notion where Thomas Jefferson misquoted or mispronounced or mistranslated a word in the Greek that led him to say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness instead of harmony. Now, to have harmony, the implication is you live together and that you're happy if, or pleased or content if there is harmony with your neighbors. And likewise,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
instead, this obscene, and I can't stress and underline the word obscene more, this obscene notion that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a singular goal, an egotistical goal, where if one citizen on your block happens to have lots in the bank and is completely secure in his or her castle, it doesn't matter, nor should he care what happens to the rest. And I think that along with the cowboy, or, my home is my castle, all of these metaphors play into identity. And unfortunately, America has a cult of violence that is so deep and so intrinsic to identity that, as you said, the ladies said, everybody has a right to carry a weapon. It doesn't even have to be concealed in Texas. I mean, you can walk in with a howitzer if you wanted. So there's something very depraved, obscene, depraved. Let's use whatever metaphors we can. And if it is, in fact, the identity of many of these so-called red states, one beggars the question, why should, in fact, we be a United States after all? Could the bluff be made, very much like Britain made her bluff with Brexit and has now found herself impoverished? And I'm going out on a limb here, but could a bluff be made where one says, if violence and that nature is all that you hold on to, if you see the others who believe in a multicultural world as Satanist worshipers, I mean, really, is this what you call the United States? Something very sick has happened. So I've often, just to be provocative, suggested that there should be a significant divorce that takes place, and let those people, and of course there are always minorities within those societies, but let them choose a different path. Let them, I don't want to say ferment in their hatred and their purity, but there's something very difficult when you try and, I mean, what can I say about Israel? Let's touch the most untouchable question of all. What do you say when you have Jewish friends of mine who go into Grand Central Station to protest, not in our name, 5,000 of them? What do you say when hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been protesting against Netanyahu for the last 7 months before October 7th, trying to get him to step down, to stop his coup against a democratic Israel. What do you say when their fellow citizens happen to be operating on the West Bank with impunity, like the old Ku Klux Klan operated in Alabama and Georgia before, well, not just before civil rights, but during the Jim Crow years? What do you say to that? I mean, how does a country find a healing place? And there is a moment, I think, where maybe one prevailing identity or one identity prevails, and it's so difficult when you have these kinds of divisions.
I want to ask the opinion of the group about something.
Mm.
I was reading a book. The first time I ever read it, I hated it because there were no footnotes. It's called A World Lit Only by Fire by William Manchester.
Oh, right. I remember that.
And I found out recently that he wrote it as a sort of exercise in recovery after he burned out writing some other book.
Yeah.
But in the middle of this book, which I'm now reading for maybe the third time, and I'm taking him seriously now, I realize what he's talking about is true and not just, I mean, at first I was so shocked I thought he just made it up.
No.
This was true. This part of it was true, and I'm trying to grapple with this truth.
Yeah.
In the period of time when the Reformation had begun in various parts of Europe and in England, and all these different people with different ideas about theology and doctrine and hierarchies, all of it, all these different ideas were spread across Europe and the British Isles. There was, from the way he puts it, there was misinformation intentionally spread.
Oh, yeah.
Centers of power into a population that didn't even read or understand the issues that the theologians were debating. So this misinformation was spread throughout Europe and led people to literally slaughter each other, not even understanding why they were doing it. I feel like that's the closest parallel to what I see in America right now. The misinformation is going out in such a way. These people, I have a brother in this position. He's smart too. I don't know how this happens, but they get the misinformation channel on, and then they just keep listening, they keep reading, they keep hearing the same misinformation, and it's completely turned them away from anything that's even remotely factual.
Right.
That's
and remember that their algorithms built into their Facebook and to their various communities, if they have any communication, which most of them do, Instagram and whatnot. So all they will see is what turns them on. You see what I mean?
What
so they remain in a bubble.
Confirms the misinformation they already have. So the saddest page in that book was the page where he discussed Erasmus, who had tried very hard to stay in the middle and not take sides. Of course, he was, he was close to a lot of people with a lot of power, and he could have been killed officially by any of them, but he didn't take sides. So he sort of stayed in the intellectual center of the discussion, but was killed by a mob of people who weren't asking him about his theology or his understanding of anything. He was just one of those. So they killed him. That was the saddest thing to me. He tried so hard to stay in the middle.
Right.
Killed anyway.
Right.
So
that's Julia, where we are.
Julia, talk to us about this, because you're not here, but we could use you here.
Yeah.
I think as a child growing up in the war, and I didn't learn to read until I was 8, but I would look at the cartoons in the newspaper where the Germans were completely demonized, Hitler and so forth. We still do live with that demon as well. And then my shock at seeing the German prisoners of war mending the road in front of our house. And I saw them as decent human beings. They were showing pictures, photographs of their children. And I was so shocked that I had been taught to demonize the Germans that I went and stole my family's sweet ration to give to them, feeling terribly guilty about stealing the sweet ration, but feeling I had to make amends for all of this rage that I had been fed, that it was false. And this is true. I mean, ordinary Germans, ordinary English, and ordinary Americans are decent people. And then things go wrong. Antonia, do you have something to add?
No, not really. I'm just fascinated to listen.
Where are you living, Antonia?
At the moment, I'm in Germany. I was in Florence. Now I'm in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
but I'm
Is there
English.
a parallel in German society right now to what we're seeing over here in America?
Not as much.
Yes, but not as pronounced as in America.
And also, Antonia, it's just coming out of the closet in Germany, where it's come blown full out of the closet for at least 7 years now in America. And we
Yes.
have the horror of seeing Adolf being reelected after being sent away and, becoming an elected, the elected president after staging a coup, getting all of those people, like you said, in the streets with false information, and staging a putsch right there in Washington. And nobody, few have the courage to take him on. It's just extraordinary. So I think America, we are.
Yeah, we are way behind.
Year will be the most terrifying year of all, because we will watch, if we're not careful, we'll be watching the end of the experiment. And once this monster gets in and starts tearing up abusing every control that is meant to be, in a democratic system, I mean, there will be the State Department will have a very difficult time trying to export democracy overseas, to say the least. I mean, it's going to be just such a travesty, and this is where we find ourselves. So these, I use the reference of 1922, 1923 is when Adolf makes his first putsch in Munich, and he really thinks that people are going to turn to him. And there's this crucial moment when the army doesn't and actually fires on the brown shirts. But I mean, he's ready to go. And
the Germans have not forgotten that.
exactly, this is my point.
They are somewhat wary
yeah,
of following
exactly.
a demigod.
Exactly. And America, unfortunately, has never gone through that, except with people like Huey Long and a few other rabble rousers and Ku Klux Klanners, George Wallace, but they never were in the majority. They never stood the possibility of winning an election. And this is where we're facing the worst of our identity politics. And
they never had these tools for disseminating the misinformation.
Exactly. Yeah, and creating conspiracy theories and everything. So we're at a real turning point, I'm afraid. And Italy, like Germany, is inoculated against this kind of lunacy. I mean, you have Meloni, for instance, who has used this immigration card as her way of saying, we're wonderful, they're not. We're here. Why did they come? She plays all those cards. But when it came down to her election, the first thing she did was break every promise that she had made. And there have been more immigrants that have come in under Meloni than ever before. She immediately said, I want to stay in Europe. I want to stay in the euro, and I will support Ukraine. And these were all completely the opposite of her campaign platform. She wanted to leave Europe, do Brexit, or do whatever that idiotic decision was. And she also wanted to, go to bed with Putin and end the war. And when she got into power, the lust and desire for power was such that she knew that if she went against America, that would be her end. I mean, that the Americans would find a way through the CIA, disinformation to get rid of her. So she has absolutely towed the American line on everything, which infuriates her followers to no end, but she can still play that immigrant card. So at least they're happy with that. But Italy will always have some kind of center left, center right representation, not a hard right like we're going to see in America.
I'm so sorry to have to leave, but I have
Yeah.
a doctor's appointment I have to get to.
Oh,
So it's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you, Julia.
you,
Thank
Laura.
you for
Thank
this
you,
visit.
Laura. Yes,
And I
Laura
just
is
want
the
to tell you,
instigator of tonight, actually.
both Denny and Carl send their regards.
Good. Yes,
I
thank
thought
you.
Carl was going to sign on to the meeting, but he's not here. Denny has COVID.
Oh,
To
Right.
tell you, if he were feeling up to it, he would have been here. So I'm sorry.
We'll see you again.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
yes.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
I wanted to add something about what it was like traveling with my children.
hmm.
When we went to Germany, my children had been used to seeing in England war memorials, and they saw war memorials to the First World War, but they didn't see any to the Second World War. And so they asked the German family, we were in Heidelberg, and these were professors at Max Planck Institute, and they were immediately told by the German adults, we are so ashamed of what happened that there are no war memorials to the Second World War.
Wow.
And then we went to Greece, and it was a time of the colonel's coup,
Hmm.
and we got off the boat in Patras, and the bugle blew taps, and everyone stood silent, motionless. And my children said to me, Mummy, it's like Star Trek. It was terrifying. And if you had, I was traveling with my 3 children and my father, and a group of 5 was illegal. And you got fined a huge sum in drachma if you didn't fly the Greek flag. This nationalism, this patriotism, is a terrifying thing, and I'm grateful to my Irish friends who've been helping me get my Irish passport.
Well
I sort of
done.
like being able to join the other instead of being,
Yes.
in that conflict and so forth. And that
I-
my Irish friends, Catholic Irish friends, have completely forgiven me for being Anglo-Irish. And so there is hope. If only we could do this in Palestine and Israel, because we've got the I mean, Brunetta was right to be teaching the love of God, of neighbor, of enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if only we could put that into the education system
Yep.
of small children,
Mhm.
that's where we have to change. I think the rigidity of the schooling causes this terrible conservatism and desire for violence, because it's actually happening in the schools.
Yeah.
It's symptomatic of something being terribly wrong in the education system itself.
Yeah.
May I ask a question, especially of Julia, with maybe a historical analogy? But one of the things that is happening, at least in the United States now, is kind of a lawlessness.
Yeah.
Because, sort of a challenge to the rule of law.
Absolutely.
And
right.
I'm wondering if, because even in Jim Crow, they had laws. Everything was, very legal. I mean, they were obviously in violation of the natural law, but there were lots of laws. But what we're looking at now is this kind of idea that, well, it doesn't matter. That law is constraining, and really it's kind of almost like a feudal loyalty, sort of to Trump and his loyal people and all of that. And if you're disloyal, we'll use the legal system against you. So I'm trying.
You've hit on something really important. Henry Fielding wrote a novel called Jonathan Wild, and Henry Fielding was a magistrate. And what he describes in the novel is of the anti-hero who's completely criminal. And he is a trump. He's absolutely a trump. And then when Frances Trollope wrote her anti-slavery novel, and it's a documentary really about their journey up the Mississippi River, which she, as an Englishwoman, witnessed before Queen Victoria was on the throne. She titles the novel Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, Whitlaw being white law, the privilege and so forth. And in it, the anti-hero, who is Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, is modeled on Jonathan Wild and is criminal. He's poor white trash who becomes a plantation owner, who treats his slaves very badly. And the hero he's white, but he teaches the slaves to read and write, which is illegal. So he is lynched. And that is on the cover of our edition, the lynching. I never thought I would publish a book with a lynching on the cover, but they are, Fielding and Trollope are writing like, trying to remember who wrote The Prince? Machiavelli. It's satire. Swift with the modest proposal. They are saying what is taboo, what is unspeakable, but they are tapping into this envy that people have of people who break the law. This is it's that which is causing the votes for Trump, because he is a Jonathan Wild character. He is a criminal character.
Yes.
And people admire him because they wish they could get away with it too. So somehow I think if we could get the concept of law back to justice and the sense of every person. Jonathan, my son, wore a t-shirt until it was in tatters. It was from a Quaker meeting in Kentucky, Berea College. Every person is a holy place. And I made copies of it when he died, with olive leaves and so forth. But I think we need to value each human being, and where in war we don't, we dehumanize the other and so forth. That's why a whole section of this library is on all of the groups that have been subjected to poverty and genocide, racism and so forth. And it includes women and Jews. And it includes Roma, includes Aborigine, Native American, African diaspora, and so forth. Because we deliberately create the poverty of the other and make the situation unbearable. And then we punish the victim if he rebels, which Hamas did. Lord Carradine, who was my friend, he at Princeton in Woodrow Wilson School, he authored Resolution 242 in the UN, which was unanimous about the Palestine, the boundaries being maintained instead of violated. He described going and speaking before groups and absolutely being hissed dad by
Mm.
Jewish members of the audience.
Mhm.
And I had the very difficult situation of bringing him to Boulder. And one of the members of the board of trustees of the Colorado School of Mines was present at the dinner. And I had carried on one side and she on the other. And she absolutely hated him. But this is the problem of the trauma that Jewish people have gone through, as also the Roma, for centuries. And having, in the case of the Jewish people, the written history, which the Roma don't have. And it's been the dominoing. This is what troubles me so much, because we began the problem in Germany with the reparations payments after the First World War. And one of my friends at Princeton, William Heckscher, is from a wealthy ship-owning family in Hamburg. But with the reparations payments, they were so poor that he remembers being not able to see as a child and having to cling to the iron railings to walk. Malnutrition from in a family of wealth. And but that meant that the Germans turned against the bankers who were Jews, and then did the Holocaust. And then those who survived, the Zionists, made it to Israel and didn't take it out on the more powerful. They took it out on the less powerful, the Palestinians. So it's really cracking the whip, the domino effect.
Yeah.
I think if we use the principle of equality instead of hierarchy, it could be a way of avoiding that terrible bloodshed and injustice that happens.
Yeah. But it gets back to that whole leap that all of us are hoping for, is that this technique of dehumanization doesn't become concrete, but rather it's just a foil to let people sort of be convinced of their fears. And every faith that they pray to says every human being is equal.
Yes.
So this is the great, myth that I don't understand. How can they go in to their fundamentalist churches or in ultra-Orthodox, every single faith speaks of the equality of every person. So there's this wonderful deception that establishing caste in your mind, establishing hierarchies in your mind, establishing those who are good or evil, or as we were saying, this dehumanization is the absolute core of the tools that they work with. Otherwise, they would have to embrace.
It's dehumanization and demonization.
Yeah, well, this is it. You demonize and then you dehumanize.
And really, they're your own demons that you project onto the other.
You're just projecting. Yeah. But I think, ladies, I think this is also a very male trait. And it's time to also just recognize that whatever male attributes there may be, they're also the most vile sort of subhuman dimensions that come out of men that frequently don't come out of women. And that also is a huge problem. Just the male animal has been so badly wired. And we need women actually to humanize us. This is the depth of the problem is men. I hate to say it.
I don't think
so
so,
bluntly, but,
actually.
well,
I think it's a human problem.
well, it
And,
is a human problem, but let's put it this way: women to go out and bludgeon people and go out and pull out guns and start shooting, and they just don't, darling. They don't. Um, I mean, we can finesse this in 100 ways, but I think women heal and give birth and think about long term and try and hold families together while men are just short wired. And I know this is a great generalization, and there have been some wonderful men, but there have also been, this they fall for these dehumanization tricks all the time.
I loved during the Vietnam War. Do you remember people were wearing this badge saying, "War is not healthy for children,"
Yes,
and that was a
Other
movement.
living
men,
things.
for women, children, and other human beings.
That's right. And I think
And
we
then
need to
there
go
was this
back to
little
that.
flower, that broken
Yes,
flower.
right, like drawn by a child.
Yes,
That was a great movement, and
it was. It
and
was
a lot
because
of peace movements have been spearheaded by women. But
yes,
women can be internalize their own sense of being considered inferior by men,
yeah,
Oh,
and then they
absolutely.
will lash out at other women. And
Yes.
I, I've
Yes.
experienced a lot of this in my life, and
Yes.
it's hard. I think it's hard for anyone. What I've just met this wonderful architect. She's a friend of Carlo Sisi, Fabrizia Scarsaletti, and she's brilliant. And she explained to me she was educated in the Montessori school. Maria Montessori was the Italian educator of the poor, realizing that they would learn better if they were allowed to have sensory education, to
mm,
touch and feel and measure and so forth, and to be allowed to progress at their own speed instead of being forced into classes and so on. And Mussolini exiled her. She had to live outside of Italy because her ideas were not compatible with fascism. Now, unfortunately, her system of education is only for the rich, not for the poor.
mm,
But she was really working with the right hemisphere. And I think if we could go to her form of education, or like Don Lorenzo Milani here in
yes, mhm,
Babiana and so forth, we do need to really change education of
mm,
children to avoid this rigidity and fear that is happening now.
mm,
And there's a wonderful article in The Guardian. He's American Asian, he's gay, and he goes to try to find out what the right is like in America. So he travels from San Francisco all the way across America, going to talk with Trump supporters and a women's convent and so on and so forth. And what he found actually was that these people who we think of as terrible were actually quite decent. And he wrote this very sweet essay about the fact that we need curiosity, we need to study the other, and
Yeah.
I think that's what I
Don't judge, be curious. Yeah.
that's right. And that's what I feel I've done here with living with the Roma, who began as really quite awful people, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day, angry, upset. Now they're just so sweet and generous and courteous and decent, and I'm just so amazed. My faith in human nature has really been restored by people who were at the very bottom, who I think is an expression, capax Dei. If you're capable of God, if you have the capacity to have faith, which is what they have, Their faith is stronger than mine. They're now very Pentecostal. They build the house with prayer and hymns and so forth, and they're very generous to other poor, Italian poor, drunk alcoholics on the street. They will go and buy them a sandwich and so forth, even though they're very poor themselves. So I think there's hope. But I think we do need to work on education, which I love John Lotzer for wanting to do work in that field, but it didn't seem to materialize. Any more comments, or shall we wind up?
I would just close by saying that perhaps it's only communities like yours, Julia, and other small communities of peace and equality and justice
Yeah.
that these become prophetic examples to the world, and lessons can then be borrowed and applied elsewhere. It may be that that's the answer, rather than trying to transform systems and thinking. Since we do have so much hierarchy, a lot of people think, oh, we'll just get to the top, and then like our Speaker of the House, let's Christianize the country from power. Let's get the reins of power and do it. And obviously that's going to fail. It's going to be oppressive. So I'm thinking that your example of what you have built over the decades with the Roma and with the scholarly community. I mean, this is exactly, these are models for us.
And what we need.
Yeah. But I think Angela is a model too. Angela was my student at Princeton. She was at Princeton on a scholarship. Her father was a cobbler, and she's working in international law and so forth. And it was Angela in my class who read in Italian the opening of the Dante's Commedia. It was read so beautifully. And,
that was a very long time ago, but wonderful memories. And you were my favorite professor, and I'm so happy that we were able to reconnect.
Yes, me too. Me too.
Zoom.
Right. Yes. So I bet your life has been an example of that. You have walked in all of the different spheres.
Oh, me?
Yes. I mean, you've been in the position of being despised as an Italian and poor. You've also been in the position of privilege.
Yes.
Not allowed the privilege to make you rotten.
No, we have. It's all about what Pope Francis calls the social mortgage. It's
right.
all people, and especially propertied people. Terence was mentioning about the person with the big house and has what they need, not caring about anyone else. Well, the social mortgage is about the sharing the fruits of our privilege, and ensuring that that it's sort of a redistributive, sort of a constant redistributive property or process. It's just a wonderful way of thinking about that society has, that we have a debt that we have to pay. And
have to pay, I feel, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it for property owners, or for talent, or for skill, whatever it is that you to give and to constantly give and ensure that others are being lifted, whether it's economically, culturally, in whatever ways you can help. So it's I really love that image, and it helps. But And being in a law school, I have great opportunities to, we have students who come in who might not be quite ready for the program, but then we give them extra help, and then they tend to do as well as everyone else. So those are wonderful opportunities. Again, they're small steps, but you kind of create these small models of justice and peace and equality, and hope that it just
Yeah.
influences
That's
others.
a Hopi concept too. You need the microcosm that will influence the macrocosm. But also what you were mentioning, Pope Francis, was a breakaway movement from the Quakers by a woman and the Shakers. And their concept is that we are debtors to God, to use our talents for the common good. And it's the same concept, and it's a beautiful one. And that is where happiness is, isn't it? You don't have guilt if you're working in those issues. And I used to find at Princeton, the students I had who were depressed, and many of them were the very rich students who had the sense of they did not know what was wrong. But if you turned them on to Problems of World Hunger, the course we taught in Woodrow Wilson School, and we started Oxfam America, they came out of that, and they came to like themselves. I think a lot of this violence comes from self-hatred. The demons are really their own demons, and if they could understand that in the sense of communal sharing, that they would find the happiness. It's not an individual thing. Any more comments before we end? And I'm so grateful to you for tonight. We weren't expecting this. And thank you.
Well, we do it again soon, right?
Okay, right.
I would say that for all of us, we need to also be aware that the kids today understand they're facing a lot of existential crises, including this disaffection between, this identity politics. And if you talk to any kids under 35, they don't get their news from television. They don't get their news from radio. They don't get their news from even the New York Times, which is principally how we've gotten our news. They get their news through TikTok, through influencers, through different sources. And 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 100 is actually getting toxic news. A lot of them have, understood that no matter how you twist and turn this whole debate over Gaza, that babies are being sacrificed. And that bothers them enormously. And there used to be only one way to look at the Middle East, through a very cultivated lens of, that we all know so well. Similarly, I think with in American politics, the same thing. Any kid under 35 understands that the world is multicultural. Any kid under 35 understands that those Romes that you have, Julia, are just as entitled as anyone else. It's their parents, the system, the structures, the status quo that don't, but they do. And they don't abide by all of the status quo sort of reconfirmations. They are much freer than we ever were, because they also have the ability to have these inputs that are from friends, from the popular music, from popular, that we couldn't have. We had it in the Vietnam more because of the whole explosion of Haight-Ashbury and all those rock groups who served to send a different message that was a very a very revolutionary message that kids passed on with record players and FM. Remember FM stations? How
Yes.
radical that was. Well, we have to think that they are being informed with all sorts of FM stations that we aren't even aware of. And they're inoculated against a lot of this toxic business that we see and fear. They have gay friends, they have black, mulatto, friends of every ethnic group. That is the way the world looks like now. If you go into any classroom, it's not that they're all, white on one side and two little fellows on the other side. It's all mixed. So the demography and how it's changed and how they communicate is going to be the future. And it's not going to be some kind of right-wing madness that we're facing. I think we're looking at the last hours of the last gasping sort of grip, call it a colonial grip, Julia, but it is the last hours of trying to hold on desperately, a bit like Jim Crow was before LBJ just opened it up. And
Right.
so
Yes,
we
I-
have to realize that you talk to any young kid under 35 and you'll hear a discourse that's very different from our concerns.
that is hopeful, right?
They know
And the
that
same thing
we,
happened.
yeah,
The
sorry,
same thing happened in Florence when Brunetta Latina
right,
had gone on embassy to Spain, where he was in
right,
contact with Arabic and classical
right,
learning, and
absolutely,
brought it back to Florence. And this young group, his students, Brunetta, Guido
yeah,
Cavalcanti, Dante Alighieri, and Francesca de Barberina, and the other poets of the Dolce Stil Nuovo, they were playing with Arabic love lyrics,
exactly, yeah,
Spanish love lyrics,
yeah,
Provençal. It was very
exactly,
multicultural. It was an
exactly,
explosion in music and poetry that was essentially multicultural. And the last chapter of the book on Dante, I initially called it Dante's Democracy. And my colleague, friend at the University of Florence, she said, "Oh no, not democracy. That's what America imposes on the rest of the world."
not
So then I
true.
changed it to Dante's decolonialism,
Okay,
which actually
yeah,
doesn't exist as a word. I coined it. It's
yes,
decolonialization, but I don't like the form of decolonialization. And what I'm seeing, decolonialism is where women and men are equal,
yeah,
races are equal,
right,
religions are equal, like the virtuous
right,
Brahmin on the Ganges. Dante
right,
says would be saved even though he had never known Christ, and so forth.
right,
Something about openness. And I think if we can, and you're
yeah.
saying that the young people are already getting there.
Absolutely. They see this, they know that this is the way. The other thing I wanted to tell you is, well, I mean, that you know so well, and part of the, Brunetta's his great transformation by saying you kiss and embrace the other, or not so much the enemy, but just the other. What he was doing is shattering the whole logic of vendettas in Florence through
Yes.
the
And the
families,
towers.
the
Yes.
Guelph and Ghibellina and the towers. And he was literally taking on the entire status quo that had lived and actually thrived with this violence and had dictated this was the only way to think and to live. And he comes out, and also Dante with his Stila Nuova, they come out and they're redefining a whole new identity of what it is to be a citizen, of what it is to be a citizen in this city, in this world, and how all of that requires different behaviors so radical that it will absolutely threaten the last ghosts of the Guelph and the Ghibelline.
Mhm. Right. And then you
And
do
that-
have the Corso Donati to show up in the midst of it all.
Well,
And release
exactly. I mean,
prisoners
it
from the
doesn't get rid of
prison,
them, but
and so forth. And
but
cause
it gives
Dante's
so
exile.
but their poetic message is of course what lives on, and I think these kids today also know that they are fighting against a status quo that doesn't want to give up, but they will it will in the end. I mean, they are the future, and the rest of it is the past.
Mm.
Right. Mhm.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Julia. This was
Thank
lovely.
you. Thank you.
Yes,
all of
thank you, Julia,
Thank
very
you.
much.
It's
And
great to
Ciao,
meet
Bella.
everyone. Take
yes.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.